You ever look back on your life and think, oh, I'm so grateful that I don't have to start over, because it would be a lot of work. And while that's true, it would be a lot of work, but you'd also benefit from your experiences to date. And that's what today's video is on. If I had to start over, what are the 7 things I would do to make my journey more profitable, more enjoyable, and hopefully make the journey a little more comfortable than it was for me, particularly in the first couple years, as it is for all of us as we're starting off. And that's really what the first point's about. Is the very first thing I would do is think about what could I do to level up my skills in order to get out of a minimum wage job sooner. So in the town that I grew up in, they had a really nice program. I'm grateful that they had the program. Essentially anybody in town that needed a job, an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, any young person, 18, 19, maybe 20, the city would hire you to do in the summer for a couple months to do some outdoor work. So in my case, using a hatchet, digging up sod and moving it to another location. And I was glad I had that job, but you know what? I was even happier when I was able to skill up and make a job making 50% more than minimum wage, which is more than I'd ever made in my life. And the sooner you can do that, the better. And you know, I'm not talking about making $1 or 2 more than minimum wage. I'm talking about the sooner you can learn a skill to get 2 times minimum wage, 3 times minimum wage, 5 times minimum wage, the better. And it doesn't have to be a 4-year college degree. It doesn't have to be a 6, 7, 8-year journey person craft program. Those are great programs. But there's shorter term programs that you can pick up in a couple weeks. For instance, there's a shortage in the healthcare field of nursing assistants. And it turns out to be a certified nursing assistant. You know, something a lot of people can get through in a couple weeks, and it costs like $500. And all of a sudden you're making 2 to 3 times minimum wage. So just one example. Thing number 1 I would do is I would skill up as soon as I can. The second thing I would think about is as you're building your skill set and you're starting to become valuable in the workplace, you've got a big decision in front of you. And essentially all of us have this decision we have to make. We're either building somebody else's dream, right? We're either an employee and building somebody else's dream, or we're working hard building our own dream. And we have to make that choice. Which one's right for us? Now, we make that decision early on, and many of us are going to say, well, you know, we need the experience, we need the skills, so we're going to help build somebody else's dreams. And maybe our paths overlap with that company for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever the time period is, and then we get to reevaluate again. Do I want to take another job? Do I want to take another job and build somebody else's dream? Or do I want to bet on myself and build my own dream? And I'm not trying to lead people towards one decision or the other. I just want it on your radar screen. I want you to constantly be thinking about it. Is it time for me to build my own company? And for many of us, we're going to say, you know what, just not something we want to do. We don't want to take that risk. But I think it's helpful to be conscious of that and always be thinking, do you want to build somebody else's dream, or do you want to build your own? So that would be more in the forefront of my mind than it was when I was 25 years old, let's say. Okay, number 3, and this one's had the biggest impact on me. If somebody were to say, hey, Azul, you know, how were you able to go from, you know, your grandparents were farmers, how were you able to go from a minimum wage job to doing pretty well in life? And I would attribute the vast majority of my ability to do that to this, which is using mentors. And, you know, ideally a mentor is somebody that's done what you'd like to be able to do, and will sit down with you for a coffee every couple weeks and have a conversation and give you some guidance. That's the ideal world. I didn't have that available to me until really the last 10 or 15 years of my career. Before then, when I was young, when I was 17 years old, 18 years old, my mentors were Brian Tracy's, the Zig Ziglars. I would go to the library, and back then the records were LPs, long plays, I think 33 inches, does that sound right? No, that sounds too big. But anyways, I would bring those records home, and those were my mentors. And I've always been more of an auditory and a visual learner. And so in today's world, Audible is a great source. Buying books by people who have been in industries and who have succeeded. I think it's the most underutilized resource. So like I said early on, and really until I was 30, those were my primary mentors, were, you know, the books, the tapes, listening to other people. And then I was fortunate I was able to be mentored by some business people, and frankly, that was game changing for me. But as I look back at my life, frankly, I can't believe it worked, because I really just looked at people people and ask myself, who do I admire? What is it about them that I admire? And let's figure out how to do that. And thank goodness it works. Even though it's number 3 on my list, that's my number 1 tip. The next thing I would do is, I don't care how much you earn, you also need to invest. And there's investing in like the stock market and bonds, things like that. And there's also investing in yourself. There's times that it makes sense for you to make a larger investment. For instance, when I was in my 20s, I decided to go back and get my Master's of Business Administration, my MBA. I was 2 years off of work. It was expensive, but I made the decision to make that investment in myself. And at the time and still today, there's a lot of articles that say, does getting an MBA really financially pay off? And a lot of articles would say that it does not. And I don't disagree with those articles. But what I was looking for is, I wanted to live the life that I wanted to live. I wanted some doors to open in certain industries, specifically what I get to do now. I'm not sure that that door would have opened if I hadn't taken the time to get my MBA. So invest in both the stock market, but also invest in yourself. Before I get to invest, I guess I should have said, save. Let's say you skill up and everything's working well and you're making $100,000 a year. Half of all Americans that make $100,000 a year or more, half of them don't save a dime. So yes, I'm glad you were able to skill up. And I start with that because if you want to save, it really comes down to 2 things: what your income is and what your expenses are. And for a lot of people, boosting their income can really have a substantial impact on how much you can save, is the income component. The average household makes about $75,000 a year. The average expenses for the average household is about $55,000 a year. So by the time you pay taxes, you don't have a lot left to save. The average American, they have like $5,000. So if they can go from making household level $75,000 a year to $100,000 a year and bring home, let's say, an extra $10,000 after taxes, or $15,000, and save 10 of that. Well, they just went from saving $5,000 a year to saving $5,000 plus the $10,000, which is now $15,000. So they tripled how much they can save. The next thing I want to talk about is related to investing, but as you get older, I think it makes sense to start looking at your investments and saying, are any of these income producing investments? And really, in the stocks and bonds world, bonds pay an interest rate, so that's income producing. Stocks pay dividends. That's really how you get income off of your stocks and bonds, is dividends and interest. And then outside of stocks and bonds, real estate. And doing a little bit of real estate, I think, can make sense for a lot of people, in part because you get a little bit of leverage. Let's say you decide to buy one rental property and it's $500,000. In general, if you put down $150,000, 30%, you should be able to get a business loan to buy that piece of property. And now you have a $500,000 asset that's working for you, but you only had to come out of pocket for $150,000. Now, I'm not a big fan of debt, but I do think that there's 2 types of debt. There's destructive debt, which is the type I don't like, which primarily is credit cards. It can also be, be kind in the comments, destructive debt can also be a car loan if you're buying a very expensive car. And really think about that, because that can be the second largest or third largest expense for most Americans. And are you really getting that joy out of that car? Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. It's your decision, not mine. I just want to put it on your radar screen. So there's destructive debt, which primarily is credit cards, but it could also be something like an expensive car loan, or a loan for an expensive car because you were stretching to buy a fancy car. And if you're my age and you've never bought a new car and it's your only new car, God bless, I celebrate that. But if you're doing that every 2 years, it can set you back financially. So there's destructive debt, but then there's also constructive debt. There's positive debt, and that's what I would call a little bit of debt to buy rental income. Now, I'm not a real estate person. I should share that. None of this is financial advice. I just want to put these things on your radar screen. But for me, if I was starting over, probably in my 30s, my mid-30s, I might have picked up a rental property and I might have added to that portfolio one property every 7 or 10 years, just slowly, so that I'd have my investment portfolio. I'd have Social Security over time. I don't get a pension. Many of my viewers are not going to get a pension. But the third leg of my retirement stool would be rental income from rental properties. And again, I would build that slowly, and I'd be super conservative because I wouldn't want to put at risk my investment portfolio and the other things that I've worked hard for. The last item, number 7, is I just want to remind you, there's always ways to make more money, but there's never ways to make more time. So it's important that we enjoy the journey. And yes, picking up up a side hustle. Yes, doing a rental property can move the needle financially for you, but you also want to enjoy the journey, particularly if you have young kids at home. Once our kids move out to college, I read a report the other day that said when our kids head off to college or trade school, or they leave the home for whatever reason, we have at that point spent 80% of the time that we're going to spend it with them. So, I want you to treat your time as precious. And yes, I want you to think about, picking up a side hustle. I want you to think about skilling up. But one of the benefits, for instance, of skilling up is maybe you don't, let's say you're a college student, and if you're working minimum wage, maybe you're working 20 hours a week. But maybe if you got a job paying twice as much as minimum wage, you'd only work 8 or 10 hours a week. So you've given yourself the gift of time, and that's what I want you to think about, is the gift of time. And related to that, I want you to think about watching this video here, which is 7 things that I want you to stop doing in your 40s and 50s in order to enjoy the journey more. I'll see you in that video. Bye-bye.